welcome to the inaugural meetup, and we're very, very lucky to have Laetitia Vitaud as our speaker tonight. So Laetitia is, she speaks a lot and writes a lot about the future of work, and she's going to be talking about her book, the French, so I'm going to read, embarrass myself, de Labeur à l'ouvrage, it's called, so, which is from Labeur to craftsmanship. Yeah. And so clearly one of the big themes of this book is how societal and technological change is making, or is seeing this big sort of incipient rise in craftsmanship. And it's very fitting that, given that's one of the themes we're discussing, that we have Arthur here from livelihoods who have kindly sponsored this event. Yeah, it's a big band. It's a huge band. Which is the one that you like?
I like the American IPA. I think it's my favourite beer. It's Eating Boxer.
I hope so.
Yeah, that's
you got future fools. That was a, yeah.
So we have fans in the room. So the way this is going to work, so Laetitia's going to talk a bit about some of the major themes from the book for 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to invite a few people up to have a discussion with us up here. So Arthur, because he's very much embodies this shift. So he used to work at EFG, right? So threw in a high-paid private banking job, which he didn't like. Joking, this is my bit from EFG. And he decided to pursue his passion. Decided to pursue his passion as an artisan. So he embodies very much one of the trends. And we have Dave Brown here, also is going to join the panel. So how do you describe yourself, Dave? As an entrepreneur, an investor, Suisse council member, bon vivant?
No, I change every 10 years. Okay. So I've reinvented myself every 10 years.
That's perfect.
Perfect trend.
So lifelong learner. And then we have, he should be at the front, so we have Alexander Barclay, who works for the State of Geneva. What's your job at the State of Geneva? It's all things digital, right?
Advise their digital policy and innovation, yeah. I'm a member of the Digital Innovation Lab at the State of Geneva.
So we have the man who's leading the charge for the State of Geneva in terms of reinventing government as an institution. So
I think saying leading the charge is a bit strong.
Yeah, but come on, I've got to do it.
It's a task the whole government the whole state is working on, and we support them.
Great.
If I may.
That's fine. But that's my job. My job is to big you up, so that people are excited. Okay, so it's modesty. Voilà. Okay, so without further ado, then, so over to Laetitia, and I'm going to continue drinking craft.
Hi everyone, I'm very happy to be here in Geneva. The last time I was here was 20 years ago, and I have very fond memories of Switzerland and holidaying in a Romain-Moutier and things like that. So I hope this is the beginning of a new relationship with Switzerland, when I can, I intend to come more often. Also, I like it. I'm half French, half German. Actually, Switzerland's the neutral area, right? It's where I should be, I guess. So I wrote this book about the future of work after about 4 years of writing continuously on the subject and doing research. And I did something completely different before then, because I was a teacher. And my specialty was American politics, and I taught at Sciences Po in Paris, and I was a teacher for about 10 years, and realized that I wouldn't be able to do exactly the same thing for 43 years, because at the time there were all these reforms, these pension reforms, where every 5 years you're supposed to work an extra year before you can get a full pension. And I knew that by the time I got there, it would be 45 years. And the idea of doing the same thing for 45 years in an institution that's rather closed, very closed from the outside world, did not very much appeal to me. So I wanted to do something else. And I left civil service in France, left France altogether, moved to the UK, worked for a tech company in HR, left the company and started my own. And now I've had this company for 5 years now, and my company consists in writing and speaking about the future of work. And the way I started my business was simply by publishing publishing articles on the subject. And then I didn't have to look for clients. They had read my article, came to me and said, would you like to do this project with us, or would you like to work on this research, or do this and that? And I started working for a freelancer platform called Malt in France that has about 100,000 freelancers on the platform. It launched in Spain and Germany, so it's probably going to be the biggest competitor to Upwork, the American freelancer platform. And then I worked for an HR consultancy, and now my main client, because I'm still self-employed, my main client is a media company that's specialized in HR subjects, HR and future of work subjects, and it's called Welcome to the Jungle. So basically, all I do is write about the future of work. And because I did so many things of work, but with different angles, always about work, but with different angles, I thought, well, basically at some point I had this I felt the need to think about what my message was and what the narrative was, and if I had one, and I actually do, because the reason why I did everything I did was because I was unhappy in my work, I was unhappy in my job, and that's how I got started, and that's how I started thinking about what was wrong about the jobs that I had, and my belief then and now was that there's something about the organization of work that makes people sick or very, very unhappy. And so that was probably the main idea, and I used history, economics, sociology, etc. to make it into a narrative that would, mean something, and that's how I started writing this book 2 years ago, and it was published 2 months ago. And so it's called Du Labeur à l'ouvrage because in lots of different languages, and in German or Spanish or etc., you have always two families of words when it comes to work. You have the family of words that somehow refer to suffering and pain. Right? Labor is divine punishment. It's what you have to go through to give birth, and what you have to go through to feed yourself and your family, and it's painful, right? In Spanish, trabajo, or in French, travail, it all comes from the same word, trepalium in Latin, supposedly, which was an instrument of torture used by the Romans to tear people's limbs apart. So yeah, that's basically same with Arbeit in German. Arbeit is said to have the following etymology, that it comes from a Slavic word that basically also generated the word robot, and robot means slave originally, etymologically. So yeah, that's this family, and then you have another family of words that all have something to do with creation, with achievement, with craftsmanship. Ouvrage in France, œuvre, craftsmanship. Work and Werk in German are both more positive words. It's something that you transcend, and something that you produce and achieve, and something that you leave to the world. There's something that you leave behind. So how do you go from torture to achievement and craftsmanship and creation, and this power that you have of both finding fulfillment and creating something? The divine part in each human is supposed to be found through work, in work. So that's how I found the title, Du Labeur à l'ouvrage. And because I'm a history buff, and my main subject was American politics and history, I started with history. And the thing is, when it comes to work, we have one model in mind and one model only, and it's a very recent one too. It's this industrial model of the Fordist system of factory work. And even though there are very few factories left, or at least very few workers left in those factories, it's still the dominant model that's kind of shaped all our institutions, that's shaped the organization of work as we know it today, including in other sectors. And we're left with institutions that still kind of work, that we find difficult to leave behind, and that's why that's why the model is still dominant. And it's no coincidence that when politicians speak of work, they have to go visit a factory. They have to put a helmet on, and they have to basically see real male workers doing something, right, on an assembly line. It may be a bit of an exaggeration, but you see the idea. It's still quite true that that's the image of you. And the rest, like domestic work, is that even really work? Women did it for free, so is it work? And some people still do it for free. Same with other things. Is it work when it's something you do for passion? So all the rest is not clearly identified. The reason why it's not clearly identified as work is also because it never really fit into that model that was so beneficial to us. And that Fordist model relied on a very, very powerful deal that was beneficial to everyone. And the deal was this one. In exchange for division of labor, that is alienation and subordination, you had a bundle of benefits that was irresistible. That bundle included, obviously, stable revenues, a wage that came every 2 weeks or every month, and powerful unions that would fight for you so that that wage would grow over time, the promise of stability and a job for life, at least a job for a very long time. And then other institutions came, such as paid holidays, and then retirements of future revenues, pension, social protection, insurance, health insurance, and all of these things, and together with, again, a social and political identity through powerful unions. And all these things combined with, let me not forget, access to banking credit, because with the payslip, suddenly you have a proof of solvency. So the banks innovated in the 20th century, in the mid-20th century. Suddenly, they lent money to those who didn't own anything based on the promise of future revenues. So that led to, obviously, a boom in consumption, and this whole model of, in the US, the large spread of suburbs and all based on the use of automobile and all of that. So you could buy a car, you could have access to housing, all of that was included. And also I may add the possibility of sending your children to university and the promise of upwards social mobility from one generation to the next. All of that was in the bundle, and I'm sure I'm forgetting lots of things. So the trade-off was very much irresistible. It's not that people found division of labor and subordination fun. If you think of Charles Chaplin doing the same work again and again, he didn't have fun doing it. It's not that people found it okay. Even Adam Smith, who first theorized division of labor, said that division of labor led to a form of alienation. They would make workers, it would make workers less skilled because they would have to focus on one task. But, he said, even though there is a form of alienation, I'm not sure he used the word alienation, he didn't, but he alluded to it. Even though there's a form of impoverishment, cognitively speaking or professionally speaking, the enrichment, global enrichment, global wealth that division of labor makes possible, makes the whole thing irresistible. And it's based on the idea, obviously, that wealth is divided, that wealth is shared equally between workers and all the other parts of the deal. And indeed, that wealth was shared very evenly, because workers in general had a strong negotiating power. Those unions were extremely powerful. So they also gained political power, and as a result, it led to the creation of new institutions, social protection institution. Think of the creation of the American Social Security in 1935. So Roosevelt was president then, and he had experimented a few things in the state of New York, where he was the governor during the... And the things that he had experimented, he implemented for the whole country when he became president. And the first woman minister in the US, Frances Perkins, now remembered as the mother of the American Social Security in a way, implemented all the dimensions of what became a long-lasting institutional legacy that Americans still cherish today. So the Social Security Act of 1935 was more or less one of the first. You may obviously have also the German sister in mind that started a little bit before, because most of Bismarck's insurance legacy started long before the Great Depression. So it's more a 19th century legacy. However, obviously with German history, most of it had to be recreated from scratch after the Second World War. In France, the legacy of those institutions was the Conseil National de la Résistance, where an alliance of communists and Gaullists together created the French Sécurité Sociale, and that also became a very strong, long-lasting legacy. But that was, in many ways, the result of a strong negotiating power on the part of workers. They had leverage and they had strength. And so the bundle, in many ways, was the secret behind the prosperity of the post-war boom years. It made it possible to have this, this link between mass production and mass consumption, right? The Ford's great innovative idea was that if you pay workers $5 a day, which was a lot at the time, you get consumers who can buy your products, and then the whole thing will expand. And then you have banks that can lend consumers money so they can buy the things that you produce, and then you have the social protection system so that if anything happens to people and they are too old to work or too sick to work, then they will have the revenues that will make it possible for them to continue to buy things, to consume, and to be a part of the system. And so it led to tremendous growth, also a strong reduction in income inequalities, during the post-war, the three post-war decades, basically. And so the bundle is still the way we think of salaried work, even though now we've been going through an unbundling of that model for about 4 decades now. And it started long before the digital revolution, even though the digital revolution did play a part in it. It started with globalization, obviously, and the standardization of the container is a very important historical date that gives you an idea of when suddenly you have this exponential growth of global trade following the standardization of the container. And then you have the huge infrastructures that were built, and the new, ports? Yeah, ports that, became these huge industrial powerhouses and very sophisticated places with sophisticated machines to work with those containers. And that, quite rapidly in the 70s led to deindustrialization in most Western countries that had a strong industry. So little by little over the 70s and 80s, a lot of the factories were relocated to other countries because it was so easy to ship the things produced in China or anywhere else. And then came the realization that outside of the industry, actually, there was no bundle. Outside of the industry, unions were not as powerful as they were in the industrial sector. So deindustrialization was a moment of reckoning for workers, because in fact it's a paradox, but when we think of work we think of industry, and yet industrial workers were never more than 50% of all workers. In fact, even in the 20th century, a lot of workers were domestic workers, cleaning women or nurses or teachers, or did other jobs, a few craftsmen even then, a few shopkeepers, and a few farmers, and all of that. But the bundle is connected to the industry, and then benefited a few of the others while the industry was powerful. And when the industry decreased or diminished, the bundle, it's like the king was naked, right? The bundle suddenly was not as powerful. So that was the beginning of the unbundling, the decline of labor unions, the decline of this sentiment that you are a part of a common class of workers who have the same objectives, who have the same interests, because people who don't share the same employers did not have this tradition of connecting and fighting together for better work conditions. And then after deindustrialization, so little by little, depending on the countries, it covers 2 decades at least. Then came the financialization of the economy in the 1990s, and probably it could also be called a different paradigm in many ways. With the financialization of the economy came the end of the job for life, the end of the promise of economic stability that came with the bundle. And so all of a sudden you're left with division of labor and subordination without the stability that came with the other two things, right? Last but not least, the digital revolution kind of accelerated some of the trends that started long ago. And now we're left with, because most organizations are still shaped by scientific management, they're still shaped by Taylor's idea of how you can define work as a series of one best ways performed by different individuals who preferably should be interchangeable so that you're not dependent on people, on individuals. So we're still left with that organization, but the bundle is kind of, can you say, dwindling away, or really not what it used to be. So you have no or less stability. The promise of a job for life is not a promise that's for everyone, it's meant for very few. You have less or lower wages, and the share of the pie that is given workers is much smaller than it used to be. You have no access to housing for some workers who have short-term contracts with no stability and find it much harder to access banking credit. Furthermore, with the rise of geographic inequalities following the digital revolution, you have real estate prices that have gone through the roof in some places, especially the places where there are a lot of jobs. And so people who used to be able to afford a home, an apartment or a house, are no longer able to afford it. So there again, it's an aspect of the bundle that is going away for many people. Social protection hasn't disappeared completely yet, thank God, but a lot of it is not what it used to be. If you take pensions, obviously, for the younger generation, for the youngest generations, they're not going to have the same pensions as their parents, and they know it, and they know that they need to save, because otherwise they will be too poor to sustain a good life, and etc., etc. So with this unbundling, we're left with a bit of a problem. Division of labor and subordination is still there, but the bundle, not really. So in fact, the problem is that with the end of corporate loyalty, is followed by the end of employee loyalty, little by little. They know they're not going to have a job for life. They know the bundle is not what it used to be, even if they don't even if they don't say it in so many words. And so you have a lot of classes of workers, or different types of workers, who are questioning the other two elements of the trade-off, namely division of labor and subordination. So subordination is questioned by all those who want to become self-employed. Salaried work reached a peak in around 2000, around the year 2000. And since then, the number of self-employed people has risen quite a bit. And the number of the new self-employed people are not majoritarily traditional shopkeepers or plumbers or, physicians or all those people who could, in the past, who were self-employed. But they are, for example, IT developers and graphic designers and UX designers and some SEO experts and consultants and, a lot of people who call themselves freelancers or just consultants, depending on how they want to identify. And these people really challenge the whole concept of subordination. It's not something that's acceptable. And for the young in IT jobs, the idea of a 9-to-5 job in a traditional corporation is just not very appealing. And that's an understatement. A lot of them see it as, the ultimate form of alienation. And the more they are on, the more they have skills that are very much in high demand, take data scientists or Python developers or something like that, the easier it is for them to challenge subordination. And so they become freelancers. Some of them, a very small minority of them, decide they want to be developers and work on a beach in Indonesia or Thailand and have clients based elsewhere. That's a very, very small majority of digital nomads, but they fuel a lot of fantasies. There are not very many of them, but it makes all the others think, my God, if that's possible, maybe I could have a different arrangement, a different work arrangement. And the rise of these freelancers has led little by little to salaried workers demanding different conditions. And that's how remote work is now rising extremely fast, also because of real estate prices that makes offices so expensive, and companies have to optimize the use of their office space, and sometimes a dose of remote work has to be a part of part of the whole thing. Otherwise, it's not easy to optimize your office space, and it's too expensive. Also, and that's probably what Arthur will illustrate best. There's this whole renaissance of craftsmanship among the young. It's hard to say who's a neo-craftsman and who's a traditional craftsman, because obviously there's no clear line between the two. But the whole phenomenon of the neo-artisan is in the press all the time in France, and the media all the time, because it fascinates everyone else. And the reason why it's so fascinating is that they show exactly what's wrong with the Fordist deal with the diminished bundle. They show exactly that it's possible to reconcile the head and the hands. It's possible to reconcile the need to have an impact and to find meaning at work and autonomy. And it's possible to find a different way of organizing work that would make it more fulfilling. And in the absence of the very good benefits of the old bundle, autonomy, impact, meaning, working with your hands, finding fulfillment at work becomes irresistible. And so, even though there may not be millions of them, obviously not, they are pioneers and they are role models for everyone else. Last but not least, the phenomenon of the popularity of the concept of bullshit jobs, which was first used by anthropologist David Graeber, and he used it in a very provocative way. He didn't really mean it the first time he used it in 2013. It was a provocation. He loves provocation. And he didn't expect that article he wrote would have such an impact. Pretty soon, there were surveys using the same concept, and lots of people identified with the concept. Surprisingly, in the UK, as many as 40% of the people surveyed by, was it Ipsos or some other survey company, as many as 40% said, yes, my job is partly or completely a bullshit job. So at least some of it is fully bullshit. And what it means is not that what they do has no economic value. It means that the way they perceive their job or the way they feel about it is that it's complete alienation. They have no understanding of the impact of their work, or feel that it's doing harm in some cases, or feel that they are alienated from their colleagues, from themselves, from their company, or from the impact of what they do. And that was a bit of a surprise, because obviously the concept appealed particularly to all those who have the best jobs in terms of, a good bundle. So people who are quite educated, who have jobs in large corporations, who have some economic stability, sometimes jobs that are quite secure, and these were precisely the people who identified with the concept. And my belief is that we're at a turning point in many ways, and we're going through a period of transition from the paradigm, the industrial paradigm, where work was organized in the way that I described before, and that it worked fine. But we have to innovate and find a different model. And that different model cannot and will not be based on division of labor and subordination, for all the reasons that I mentioned. And craftsmanship is not just a thing for craft beer and making furniture and being an IT software craftsman. It's something that can actually be used to rethink the organization of work within all companies and corporations. It's something that can be used to rethink the way we do services, including proximity services. It's something that can be used to reinvent the jobs of cleaning women. Because for cleaning women, for example, we've applied the recipe of Taylorism, right? A series of one best ways that can be codified and that can be measured, and squads of people doing this very quickly and very effectively. And the same applies to the job of nurses, a series of one best ways, little tasks that have nothing to do with the way you you take care of somebody and heal somebody. And medically, we need this human relationship, and we need somebody to hold our hands and not just to give us a medicine. And so the values of craftsmanship, which can be described as the following: autonomy. You choose the means to an end, to achieve an end. Responsibility. You're responsible for the end result with your client, with your customer, with your user, or simply with whatever it is that you do. Creativity. It doesn't mean you're an artist. It means that what you do your own way. It's not the one best way. And you leave a little bit of yourself behind in what you do. Empathy and human relations, and especially the singularity of the human relations. The way you do something is not the way somebody does something else, and the value of what you do is precisely in the uniqueness of the relationship that occurs, that happens when you do it. It's very clear with the craftsman and his or her client. And these values can very much help us reimagine how you organize work. It's in many ways, it reminds of the things that have been written and said about the entreprises libérées, liberated companies, about the teal organizations. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the work of Frédéric Laloux. You are? No one else? Yeah, a few, two of you. So Frédéric Laloux wrote this amazing book called Reinventing Organizations, in which he had this typology of organizations. And for him, the latest stage of development for organizations is what he calls a teal organization, where everyone brings all of who they are to work, including the spiritual dimension. And that's incompatible with scientific management, just completely incompatible. And he illustrates this idea with a series of companies that already exist, including in proximity services and nurses, and says, look, it's possible. A few organizations already do it, and he cites this Dutch organization called Buurtzorg that organizes proximity services completely differently. So basically, the subtitle of my book is L'artisanat et l'avenir du travail. So craftsmanship is the future of work. And what I mean is not only craftsmanship the way Arthur embodies it, but craftsmanship in the sense that we have to reinvent work for everyone. Well, and yeah, I was too long. Thank you.
And so thank you very much. That was, I mean, it was difficult to get into the book into 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And so again, another reason to go in and read it. And maybe we'll start actually with Dave, if you don't mind, because Dave's two-thirds of the way through it. We're impressed, because I imagine it's not easy to read in French. So, and you were just waxing lyrical about it, right?
Yeah, and it's also not very easy on the Kindle version to skip through and speed read. Yeah. No, I mean, it really covers going through, it puts a historical perspective. A bit like something like Sapiens puts a historical perspective to mankind's sort of development in general. But I say I haven't done the last third, so I don't know whether there's any. I don't know whether there's any, amazing kind of ideas. But me personally, I started off as a freelance. I quickly, after my first job for General Motors, as an IT guy, I realised it was bullshit. My boss was having to say one thing, to me one week, and then contradict himself because management from above was saying something else. The next week. So I had skills, and I kind of invest. What I realised is I invested in my own skill set, and I kind of surfed the wave. I was lucky, like the internet came along in the middle of that, so I could kind of maximise my cash opportunities. Yeah.
Just on that, I'll just going to say that. So just on that, so please be preparing your own questions but I just want, maybe we'll kick off there, because you called it a turning point, and where we're about to shift from one form of organising work to a different form of organising work. And what I like about what you say, and I haven't read the book yet, but I will, is that it's basically an optimistic message, right? Which is, the dystopian idea of all work is going to be automated away isn't true, because in fact we're going to see a boom in craftsmanship, we're going to see a boom in proximity work. But I just want to for a second challenge that premise, right? Which is, are we sure that we can't just automate away all work, including proximity work and work that supposedly requires empathy? And so just because the whole book is pretty much built on that premise, right? So just happy to hear from anybody in the audience about whether that's really a proper premise, a sound premise for the book. Alex, do you want to start?
Whether all work will be automatized away.
Yeah, which is the sort of dystopian view. Is that, have we debunked the dystopian view, or is it?
I'm not sure where we've debunked it, but I personally don't believe we're gonna get there. And in fact, so the State of Geneva has a lot of direct proximity work. All the social workers, all the education work, all the healthcare work is actually the broadest number of employees in the State of Geneva. I don't think that can be. I work for the IT department, and I don't think we're able to do that yet. You can put it that way.
Well, I think from a brewery standpoint, we have kind of a funny model in the way that we're pretty much halfway between pure craftsmanship and also with a strong industrial backbone. Putting the bottles into boxes is not fun. It's highly repetitive work. That's not the fun part of our job. So we try to automate this as much as we can. Of course, we're always limited by capital, ways of expanding, and all of that. But being a small structure, we have to get our hands dirty with a lot of different things. So I think we need to, and we are part of changing the way the industrial system works. We moved into a building that used to be large, actually the largest printer in Romandie, and I think the second largest in Switzerland. They had 2,500 employees, and the company really is similar to the traditional Fordism approach to work, and it crumbled away. When we arrived 5 years ago, it was only 400 employees left, and then it was 100, and then like 3 years ago it was 0 because it just went bankrupt. And taking one of their largest area, and it felt a bit like a rebirth of an industrial tissue, but a completely different way. But we still have industrial work going on, and it's not fun. And this, I think, we can take away and automate as much as we can, because I don't want people from the company doing that. It's not fun. It's not added value. I'd much rather we spend time creating recipe, pushing it out to the market, speaking to people, exchanging our passion. And I think it's kind of trying to bridge the way between an old way that's no longer functional and a new way that needs to be adapted and found its own purpose, so to speak.
May I add something on the subject of automation?
I find the whole debate about automation is very, very much based on the wrong premises. Because, first thing I want to say is that a lot of automation is not happening, not because things are not possible, but because labor is very cheap. Labor is cheaper than investing in the machines that can do it. And if you look at the UK, there are many, many things that are not automated because labor is much cheaper, whereas in France, more things are automated because labor is slightly more expensive.
Can I just contest you on that? Because where automation has deepest penetration is China. And you cannot say...
Labor is getting more and more expensive.
Yeah, but they're cheap compared to European conditions.
It is, but it's the price of labor is going up. It's getting harder and harder to recruit in China. And because also they want to have a part in the market of producing those machines. They are going up the value chain, and it makes a lot of sense for them to produce those machines. And obviously, we use it in the factories. And they're faced basically with the same demographic questions that we are faced with a little delay, but with a strong abyss coming up because of the one-child policy and because there's so few women. In many ways, China is faced with some of the same issues and problems that the rest of the Western world is faced with. And just to end this point, that basically the economic conditions, of workers and how much negotiating power they have, will have a lot of impact on whether or not things will be automated. And my view is the same as Arthur's, that the things that can be automated at some point should be automated, because if they are not, it's because people are treated like slaves or robots, and that's probably not good news.
We have a question here from James.
So I wonder what percentage of the dynamics of labour has been due to scarcity and the ability to negotiate around that. So initially, craftsmen, they were all over the place, but poorly paid. Then the biggest changes in the social contract in the UK happened after World War I. Women came into the workforce. World War II, you have the great book, The Lion and the Unicorn, from George Orwell, where it's like, why are we fighting? Well, we need a very different social contract afterwards. And afterwards, labour was in scarce supply, and you could negotiate very well, and you got the packages you described. Now, as you say, with the container, work becomes mobile. If you are owning a company and you've had HR issues, you really do not want anyone that's irreplaceable again, because it's just painful. So, and then people strike and do all of those horrid things. So you've got that on one side. And on the other hand, you have the elite that are in a minority, the top coders, and now the re-emergence of craftspeople, which are in such a minority that they can negotiate. So I wonder if we end up in a situation in society where we have completely replaceable haircutters, and on the other hand, you have professors and doing this, and then there was the question of the middle ground and joblessness in that regard. So I don't know if you have any comments about this dynamic of
This
scarcity.
increased polarization. Actually, I have a mic there. I don't even need one. Yeah, this increased polarization between bad jobs and good jobs is, in fact, very much an issue in the UK in particular, or in the US. A little less so in the rest of Europe for now, but it's really going that way too. And the thing is, for example, for one job of an engineer that's created in a city centre in Paris, London, or San Francisco, you have about 5 jobs that are created, four or five jobs that are created in proximity services. You said haircutters, nurses, nannies, waiters and waitresses, and yoga teachers. And among these jobs, teachers. And by the way, teachers are very hard to recruit because no one wants to have the job of a teacher in France in particular. About a million people could be recruited, were not recruited as civil servants, and so the Education Nationale has to recruit anyone to have someone in front of children. And so, how come these 5 different types of jobs that are created are bad jobs, even though some of them have a higher demand than supply. So the laws of supply and demand just simply do not apply to some of these jobs, and I have a few theories as to why it's the case, and it basically has something to do with the definition of value and with the economic metrics that we've been using. And to go back to that question of automation, we think everything can be automated, but because we do not include in that economic view of what work is or where value is, the human relationship, the human relation that's actually where the value is. There's no human relation with the robot, so basically there's no value there. So all the work that's seen as reproductive as opposed to productive, that's based on basically building a relationship. Those are the jobs, the 5 jobs compared to 1, right, that are created, that will be created in the future. And these are very hard to automate. Some of these tasks you could automate, hair cutting, etc. But that's not what the value of hair cutting is. The value of hair cutting is having the talk with your coiffeur and telling them about your scalp problems and, having their empathy and them telling you that you need to use this product to make it better or whatever. That's where the value is, not the cutting in itself. Who cares? By the way, you don't even go to the hairdressers to have your hair cut. You go there because you want a massage. And because for a lot of people, it's the only time in the week where you will be touched by a fellow human being. And the rise of loneliness among the elderly, but not just the elderly, it's probably the problem of humanity in the 21st century. And that leads to a lot of new needs. And the problem is whether or not these needs will be solvent, whether or not these needs will, you'll be able to satisfy them. But we know they're there, so there is work in the future, and that cannot be automated.
Last question. Okay, this is makes my job easy. Okay. Oh, so I'm going to go to the order in which the hands went up. So Mark,
2 ladies.
I very much buy into all the arguments, but people aren't all equal, and I think the individual, if you're talented, if you're entrepreneurial, if you're capable, the arguments apply. What happens to the less capable people who are not necessarily stupid, but just not particularly motivated, not particularly able? Where do they end up in this future model?
That's the big question. We're in an age of transitions, and transitioning from one job to another is always individual drama in a lot of cases, because if you have a job on an assembly line with a nice bundle and suddenly you said, okay, go become a nurse, and for that individual, being a nurse is not associated, number 1, with the same bundle, it's a bad job, and number 2, it's not where their identity lies, because they're a man, and being a nurse is identified as a female job, and their whole identity is a problem, or because the job that they're offered is very far away in a different geography. And so for these individuals, that's where the problem is, and that's where
being a nurse is not a commoditised job, it's a problem-solving job.
Yeah.
Being on a factory...
Absolutely. Cognitively, it's also a problem.
It's a
Absolutely. It's a different skill set, exactly. And training is not the only answer, because obviously it's a question of mindset, it's a question of having the right network, it's a question of the human relations that you have, and transitions are extremely hard. And what we need is a better safety net for these transitions to be possible, because for all these individuals who will be left with having to find something else, and there will be more and more of them. So when we speak about macro economically, we say there will be jobs in the future, that's true, but for individuals who lose their jobs to find another one, that's a different subject. And you're right, that's a very big issue for social protection and training institutions and everything we can do to support those transitions.
So I've done quite a lot, compared to most people, quite a lot of retraining. So in the last 5 years I spent 2 years doing French classes every morning.
That's why you can read the whole book.
Yeah, but I can read, but still, there's certain, especially after the age of 50, it really is very difficult. To learn some things. So you take the example of Anglophone trying to really, maîtrise the French. You just don't. There's certain bits that you just don't have in the way your brain is wired. Like masculine, feminine, and then all the exceptions of words beginning with a vowel that are sort of masculine, but for the most part feminine. Just learning all of that and trying to do it. It's just, even if you're 2 years, every morning, you just don't get it. I think there's something very clear in that this sort of mythical 10,000 hours to learn something, whether it's playing tennis or basketball or whatever. I think it's the same for learning a language, or ultimately if you were retraining from a metal worker to a nurse, is 10,000 hours is 5 man years. 40 hours a week. I think there's that's almost the starting point.
Can we teach the skills that people will need in this new work? Can you teach?
I think of this. There was a couple of years ago this French film about a metal worker, with his own personal crisis. I don't know if you've seen this film. I mean, it shows how difficult, and everybody in this room is almost by definition coming here is inquisitive and has quite a malleable brain, whereas that sort of film shows you're putting people under a massive change and pressure, and then they're just not used to it.
It's a bit Mark's point, right, which is if some things are innate and some things are not. Can we teach those things?
Empathy is not innate. Sorry.
You think you can teach it?
Oh yes, every day we earn our money that way. Sorry.
I think to answer your question, can we teach people something with that? I mean, I studied finance. I have a brewery now, but I was a banker in between, and then a commodity broker, and so I think the main teaching is that we find it comfortable to have kind of boxes where we're going to do that, and when you're a child, you have your dream job, or you want to do this and that, and you evolve with this idea. I think one thing that we need to make people understand is that they're most likely not going to do the same thing throughout their life, and they need to be ready with that. And not everyone will have the same capacity to jump from one topic to the other, and not everyone will be willing to do so. But I think it's the truth of today's market, and you just have to live with it. And I think the one who will be most successful will be the most flexible, but at the same time, the ones who are most insistent when they find something that works. So I think that's my take on it.
So we take more questions. I just want Alex. You've had a free ride so far. So there are a number of questions. So I think you raised a question about the safety net We had in fact questions about the education system.
Yeah.
In fact, if we're going to have more proximity jobs, presumably we need more affordable housing. So lots and lots of governmental type issues that are being thrown up by this shift. Do you want to comment on some of these?
I can comment on some of these. Yeah, one point. So one point that's been brought up again and again is the training, the ability we have to adapt to an evolving world, and so there naturally public schooling or schooling in general, but fundamental education plays a key role, and there's a lot of work to be done to make school evolve from an industrial era, Fordist era school where you effectively train to succeed at tests individually to more collective problem solving, working together, learning new tasks. So that's one aspect. These topics are fascinating because they touch upon so many areas, as you've just said, of policy making, be it urban planning, be it the way training works, be it the way the economy is accompanied by the state to make conditions more attractive fiscally, but also how you set up a social net. I find these issues of the development of work really interesting to consider as well from the point of view of the state as an employer. Alienation and division of labor are two aspects that when you think about the state you might think of. When you go, you call taxes and you have an issue on your specific case. I think the tax team do a terrific job in Geneva. If you've ever had to call them, they're really helpful. But you do see this image of going, talking to the state and facing someone who's depressed and who's useless. If you consider automation in that context, there's a terrific opportunity. These people are profoundly alienated in certain cases, this image that we have. So there's a huge field of work to be done within public sector as well, in Geneva and elsewhere, in rethinking the way the state operates and delivers services by automating a lot of what can be effectively automated, and then retraining these people to help citizens more personally, more individually, so you have more time as a civil servant to help people, more time as a nurse to care for the sick person rather than spend 3/4 of your time on administrative paperwork and then a very short time would be sick.
Okay, so we have a question.
Talking about schools, the good news, just coming back to is empathy teachable. Since Daniel Goleman coined emotional intelligence, it's actually been taught to our children. They're probably cleverer than us. So it's definitely there. And they know how to mediate, they know all these things. But I want to ask a different question. I want to throw in another dimension, which is scale. So I love the premise of the book. Just want us to, can we find a female version of craftsmanship?
Yes, the female version of craftsmanship.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm sorry.
The nurse.
I'm really sorry. We haven't even started. We really haven't even started. And if you have a problem with my question, it says more about you than about me. I'm sorry. But I love the premise. But we know that it would be a complete fantasy to think that we all be artisans in sort of... You converted me. I drank my first beer in 30 years. It was the American green label. We'll talk about it.
You started with the best.
Yeah,
seriously?
It's easy, yeah, it's my favourite.
Did you like
Wow,
it?
I totally loved it. Which is why I'm as cheeky as
Champagne
coming back
for
in
the
public
person.
to a guy who's kind of not happy with my question. It made me bolder, so let's talk about your recipe later.
Okay.
I want to talk about scale. I want to ask you, we all know it's not going to happen. We're not all going to be in our... So we will need managers. And so that's the one role you haven't spoken about. We touched on elites, but we haven't really talked about managers. We talked a little bit about rockstar coders. So what about them and their craft?
So there's two questions, right?
What's the female equivalent of craftsmanship?
No, that was just a starter.
Okay.
I like to provoke.
The second one is, is there a role for managers? And then if I can throw in a third one, which is, how do corporations adapt if the future is remote work and working with freelancers? Okay, so let's start.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
No.
You want me? Okay. So first, the question about scale is interesting because usually when I speak about craftsmanship, that's the first reaction is yes, that's just for the elite few. Craftsmanship for the few and scientific management for the many. And actually no, because standardization in scientific management was based on the idea that you needed standardization to reach scale. Otherwise, you couldn't have mass production and without mass production, and mass consumption. And we're in a different paradigm with the digital age. We're in a paradigm where we can have, at scale, personalized products, personalized interfaces and services. Your Netflix page is yours and yours only, your algorithms are yours. Whatever it is that you receive as a consumer, as a user, as an internet user is yours, and it's coming to products with 3D printers. You can, produce at scale completely unique products. So it's an opportunity to go back to the values of craftsmanship at scale. And by the way, organizations don't need the same qualities and the same jobs as they used to if they want to be innovative in the new age. They need to be agile, they need to be innovative. Do they need people who are good at processes and all of that? To some extent, yes, but to some extent, the people and the skills that they need are fundamentally different. And today there are too many managers, by far. I'm not saying there will be no managers left in the future, but a lot fewer. I don't think we need as many managers as we have today. And the companies that have so many of them are probably not fit for the new age.
Thank you. So some of the questions, and it goes to your third one. I was kind of hoping that you were going to say something about all this self-organization, which we've been talking about since the 90s, and complexity theory, gingerbread men, self-organization, holacracy, we know it doesn't work for everybody, but there's a shift there, isn't it, in the way that you would manage, and maybe they're maybe they're not. We know there's some very, very, very successful examples of employee ownership in completely democratically run companies that grow like crazy. But I'd really like to get your view on that side of things as well.
Because those things work for smaller organizations and they don't for large banks and large insurance companies. And yet in large workplaces you have more and more efficient workplace, a fragmented workplace with people who work for different employers. Again, the example of cleaning ladies work for a service company. Computer scientists who work for a service company, consultants who work for a consultancy, and then you have interim workers who also may have a different employers, etc., etc. So increasingly, you have workers sometimes doing the same job, but with different contracts, different relationships to the company, sometimes short-term, sometimes long-term. Basically, you're left with a mess, a complicated mess with lots of different situations, where the company is nothing but a sort of hub that just shelters them together, and managers who are left with managing their own people do not think of managing freelancers and cleaning people, etc., etc. And basically, they have this narrow view of human resources as this thing that's the only consistent employees, where in fact human resources are a much vaster thing of lots of people involved, and you might even include the users, the end users of your apps. If you're a software company, are in no way different from the workers because they create value for your company, they generate data, sometimes they work for you, and so we're left with a situation where everything's become much more hybrid and the lines are blurred between the different categories. And I think managers and the way we view management is much too narrow, and it's impossible to speak of management without taking into account the complete transformation, even of old traditional corporations whose actual human resources are much faster than they are viewed.
So you wanted to say something?
I've got a quick question about: is it easier to teach someone a new skill, or for them to find what they're doing meaningful. Because as a population, you need people to feel that they contribute, and as a manager that they're engaged. So is it easier to learn a new skill or to find that skill meaningful?
To find their existing skill.
No, their new skill. All of your transitions have been at your choice, whereas the ones you're talking about is not your choice. And the craftsman, the beauty of it is what you're doing is meaningful.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between a bullshit job and not. So, is it quicker to retrain or to find what you do meaningful and contributing?
Is it correct to really compare the two? Is it
It's just a question, it's a philosophical question.
So there's two areas I think we should discuss. One is the platforms that increasingly intermediate between the consumer and the freelancers and proximity workers, right? And what the obligations are to those platforms and how the state should regulate them. That's one. And then I think we should talk about Switzerland. This man here is called Paul Meller. His tagline is "Take fucking risks." And
I do swear a lot.
And I'm wondering, like, if the future is everybody's an entrepreneur, is Switzerland a society where people are taking up, fucking risks? So there are two areas I'd like to cover. Harry, what was your question?
I just have another view to this, because I agree 100% with you saying that we are in an inflection point of our country. But what's happened is the values of the millennials or the new generations coming up are completely different to the people who are managing them today. And it is a long process that it takes, the education system, not necessarily in Switzerland, but in most other civilized European countries. And there's a huge difference, Europe, US, and the rest of the world. But take the Nordic countries, for example, they've been for a long time educating people from a very different kind of, point of view of being, how shall we say, call it, much more independent, much more curious, much more understanding the value of themselves, finding solutions to and consequently their requirements to the organizations or wherever they work are completely different to the people who, normally are managing them. There's a big disconnect in that. Now the question is, let's leave it there. I think it's blatant when you come from the Nordics and you come here, for example. It's striking the difference how organizations are being managed here versus, Switzerland. Supposedly Northern Europe is the front runner very much further than most other countries.
Dave, should we copy the Nordic model? I think that's the question.
I do think that you hit on the point with the millennials. And I'm involved with a lot of startups, including one in Vaud where I'm on the board of directors, which is one of the top growing Swiss startups. 100 people making drones, and the team is absolutely adamant that they want holacracy, and so they've been running the company. They basically say the millennials, these guys are independent. We started independent. They just won't accept a command and control, anything about command and control, in the company. So there's no choice. In a new business, there's almost no choice except to have that. And as especially the older directors and the ones who invested a lot of money in this, well, can you just do it in the creative part of the business? And it's in ERP and manufacturing and sales support, it's the whole damn lot. And so it kind of works at a scale of 100. Whether it scales up, but there's also no way to put in the command and control, the old businesses into this.
So, that doesn't seem to work.
No, just for sure.
We're back. So I'm determined to get this question in. So, what's the State of Geneva ruled most recently about Uber? Is that the way to regulate? Is that the way to regulate Uber? Because if you speak to Uber drivers, they actually, a lot of them actually really like the flexibility of working for Uber, and the consumer likes the convenience of Uber
is to just, yeah, I think the battery's gone. Is it right to just sort of ban it? And what, conversely, what are their obligations? Because they shouldn't be. It doesn't work, you know. Just shout.
So that's an interesting question. It's an ongoing case. I'd like to discuss the opportunity for Switzerland in.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. The risk-taking question.
On this specific point, if I may, yeah, it's so holocratic organizations are interesting for an economic organization. Now, decision-making in a holocratic organization may be less fast than in a command and control, but it will be more lasting, more engagement by the whole company, really. And to a certain extent, you could argue that the Swiss political system is not organized along a holocratic, so not entirely, but in the general philosophy of initiatives and referendums, eventually on any specific topic that the parliament can decide upon. The system is such that you can disagree and launch a referendum, and then the whole population really symbolically, back in the days, would gather on the main square, discuss, and then vote. Naturally, part of the population, back in the days it was only men, until, as we discussed earlier today, until 1971, when women were allowed to participate in that as well. But you could argue this political philosophy in Switzerland would be a good basis for more of this kind of organizations. But that is not necessarily fast. And the big issue we have in the economic field, as well as in the political field, is our system fast enough to adapt with this long decision making? But that's more of a question than a. And I'd argue that you do have in Switzerland people who take fucking risks, because we have an economy that is largely built on SMEs and people like Aperture who every day have the courage of building something and better understanding what their customers want to drink.
I would say there's also one thing that would go a bit, not against, but as a break to the system, is that in general, jobs are really well paid in Switzerland. Yeah. It makes the job just more difficult, because you can get into this comfort zone where you make...
Oh, great!
Yeah, totally. Yeah. No, you get into that comfort zone where you actually make good to very good money. You might not be satisfied with your job, with the meaning of what you're doing. But taking the leap forward is, incrementally more difficult because of that. But again, then it means that you have plenty of people who have money around you, so you can raise funds. You have people with purchasing power who would value different services or products and pay a premium. So it has its pros and cons, but definitely I think the fact that you can get a comfortable position, even though that you would consider it as a bullshit job. And you'd see that compared to your neighbors, you live very well. It can make it more difficult.
What's your biggest learning having made that shift into craftsmanship?
Like on a personal...
Yeah.
I mean, everything wants to take you down all the time. So you have to have a really strong mind and keep going and standing up and starting again. And it's no one is waiting for you out there. And of course, everyone tells it to you. And it's very easy to read it and all of that, but it's still the real world, And we have very limited state support, so I think it speeds up as well the rate of failure of companies, because if you can't make it happen, then you're not going to have anyone babysitting you. I mean, my wife is Norwegian, and she has a business in Norway as well. It's just insane the amount of support they can get on every single level for everything. And I think on one hand it's amazing, but on the other it's also kind of sustain companies that should have gone out of business for a long time because they just haven't found the business model. They're not relevant. They're not doing a good job. All of that. So it's but I think it's you gotta have a hard skin and you have to build it on. And you hear it before, but until you've lived it, you just don't know it.
What's the one thing you love the most?
I wanted to just, if I may, so the high salaries are effectively a barrier for setting up a business, because you risk losing a lot of revenue at the same time, and we're not yet quite that far. We're not quite yet that far along on part-time jobs, but Switzerland, due to the high salaries, you can also live off a part-time position comfortably and launch something too.
Is this a question to your colleague? Controversial.
I wanted to answer your Uber question.
Ah, good. Yeah, you did not. Thank you for
No, because the question you asked about Uber is exactly, it is both. It is the new economy and it's bullshit jobs. So it's a new economy. People, some of them are happy because they're independent. They can do what they want and they can work the times they want. They're free to do what they want. They can do another job next to it and then earn more money thanks to the Uber contract. And on the other side, it's a bullshit job because you have to pay your own social security, you have to do everything by yourself, and you're dependent on this application, which is giving you less and less percentage. Because, as you know, Uber is taking more and more money for themselves and giving less and less to the drivers. So it is both, and that's the contradiction of where we're going to.
So what's the answer then? So what is the state's...
Well, the answer is that there is an internal conflict in the state of Geneva. On one side you have Mauro Poggia, who is in charge of employment and of social security, and he says, I want to ban this system because it's no good. And on the other side you have Pierre Moderator, who is in charge of the economy, who's looking forward and who wants modernity, and who says we have to give Uber a chance and we have to make them work. So that shows the situation that we're facing at the moment. So there is no answer, we cannot give an answer. We're in the middle of a situation that is evolving constantly.
But the sort of the binary ban it versus embrace it is a halfway house, isn't it? Can't we allow for data portability, rated portability? Things
we have to see where these things are going. Where are these new jobs? Where is the sharing economy going? Where is it going to end? And are we all going to be in a situation where we have to pay our own social security, where we have no more jobs? Or, as we have the situation in Switzerland, we still have very good fucking jobs that pay really well, and where you can be employed, and where you are employed and you're very happy being employed, and you're maybe you consider yourself as being employed in a bullshit job, but because you're earning great money, you're happy there and you're not going to move. And I don't see that as changing that quickly. We will still have corporations that really need people to be, traders and whatever. They're still going to be needed. And machines are not going to be able to replace those very quickly.
Thank you for this last intervention. Maybe let me first thank Laetitia for your talk, and I'm very curious about your book that I didn't read yet, but I will. So I thank you lastly because you address this inequality issue, which is still central in our society. What about these Uber workers? What about also, you talk first about houseworking and about how gender could be an issue of inequality in a way, because you have this Chantal who is a lawyer in Paris, but behind her could be 5 or 7 people on 2 continents and 4 countries, giving their children to another one. And what about these different levels of entrepreneurship and creativity and craftsmanship? So what about these people who sell free journals in between beggars and workers? So how can state sustain entrepreneurship, creativity and craftsmanship about for all these people, and not only for innovation in banking or IT and so on?
You said it in your talk, right, which is for the people that are very highly skilled, becoming a freelancer gives them the agency to get more money and so on. But what about everybody else? Because if demand for proximity services goes up, presumably supply does as well, because all these people will be entering the market. So in addition to all those questions about equality, and could you address that? Anybody? I'd like to hear your view on that too. Did somebody take the bottle opener by the way?
It's an excellent question, because a lot of these jobs today are performed not only by women but by women immigrants. You probably referred to nannies, and in Paris, for example, is this whole network of African nannies looking after the kids of 17th arrondissement Paris families. And the way these immigrants approach their work is much more entrepreneurial, with quotation marks, than a lot of the jobs that other immigrants did in the industry in the 20th century. And yet, because we don't know what immigration would look like in the future, because it's very much a political issue, and because it's very much linked to climate change and how many refugees and wars there will be in the near future, and how much access will we have to this vast mass of people, many of whom will be willing to work not for free but for less money than the rest of us, and that's ultimately a political question more than it is an economic question. There are two sides, of course. There's also an economic side, but depending on how we want to make the needs that we will have solvent, how value will be redistributed, how much will the public sector do, or how much will the public sector include, of how many services will be in the public sector in the future. That's something that's very hard to say without having a political view of the subject. And last but not least, I think that there's also a very much an issue of how these workers will reinvent unionism. And what we are seeing in the US, but also in the UK, is new organizations that are completely reinventing unions. In the UK at the moment, there's something called United Voices of the World, and a branch for independent workers called Independent Workers of Great Britain, that has a very innovative approach to what unions should be about. And in the US, you have these movements that are across sectors, for all women who work to clean hotels and waitresses who work in restaurants. 90% of them are women, or 95% in some sectors and for some jobs. And they have won lots of battles for minimum wage battles in different cities and states. And things that we view as the law of supply and demand is not actually the law of supply and demand. It's or it's not so simple. It's a question of negotiating and leverage and finding a voice, and probably they will find a voice. They will find more of a voice, and thank you. And digital will help. And with new unions are much more digitally enhanced than old unions. So it's not really an answer. It's a set of questions that I'm giving you as an answer.
Dave, did you want to comment on that?
No, ultimately, it's a very complicated problem, and I avoid it by just working with high-tech stuff, So, yeah, I mean, it's easy way to avoid it, and you unless you're a professional full-time and trying to understand that, you only see part of the story. I think that's the problem.
If I may, these are effectively really very political questions to write. And one example of a case we had in Geneva a couple of years ago was the papyrus operation, some of you may have heard of. So it was the minister you mentioned earlier, Pierre Moderator, who, as the Minister for the Economy, decided to try to legalize workers who've been living in Geneva for a long, long time, and in particular, in one case, it's cleaning personnel who have been residing in Geneva for a certain period of time illegally and have been working, and whose kids may have been going to school and such. And with the argument from an economics perspective that will level the playing field. if you're a local actor in that field and you're competing against people who are illegally working and not paying, social insurances and such, then you're competing against people you can't effectively economically compete against. And that program, as a pilot, was very successful in actually granting people with this whole social dimension, people who've been living here for a long, long time and are effectively members of society, but did risk at any time being caught by the police and sent back to a country that they, in some cases, have not seen for decades.
Okay, so I was so enjoying the discussion, I didn't realise it's already done 20 past 8.
Beer o'clock.
Yeah, beer o'clock. So maybe we just have one last question. This guy said his hand up for a long time, so I don't know your name.
Okay, thank you.
If you sit at the back, you've got less chances of being seen, so that's... Excellent, yeah.
Yes, you listen? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that we have a serious problem with education. Code is low, and also I teach code in an engineering school. But when you mention values of empathy, responsibility, you mention 5 values, but all of these values cannot be coded in a code. These values are very difficult to quantify. These values are something like intangible. Yes, intangible. And so my question is, I'm sure that the values that you mentioned are very, very, very important, but they are very difficult to teach this kind of values, and so nobody will implement them in the system, economic system, if they cannot handle them concretely. Okay, I'm not sure my question is clear.
No, it's an excellent question, but I don't completely agree with you on this, because software craftsmanship is actually a thing, and IT people in fact did come up with ways to have more autonomy, creativity and responsibility at work. And empathy comes, for a computer scientist, empathy comes in the form of design thinking and thinking in terms of user journeys and things like that. That's empathy, and it's been used with success by many engineers for a couple of years now, or even decades. So I think we've made a lot of progress, and this idea of the computer scientist who's the man of processes and making things more efficient, and just this efficiency person who's a cog in the machine, in the scientific management. That's one reality for many computer scientists, but it's not the reality of many others who are more in another culture of open source software and contributing to building something that will be unique and that will have an impact and a lasting impact. So it's true, it's not as easy to quantify, although I'm not even sure that it's not something that can actually be evaluated quite clearly, whether or not it's good design, for example. So I'm not sure I completely agree with what you say, but I see your point.
So one way, when you talk about the computing, if you're trying to get a product together, you say you need a hacker, a hustler, and a hipster.
Excellent.
And so it's those.
Do you mind just repeating everything you just said?
Yeah, you say that in order to get a product together, you need these 3 characters: a hacker, a hustler, and a hipster. So the hustler is the guy who kind of persuades, goes out and sells it. The hipster is the one who has a lot of the empathy stuff, but you generally judge it by he looks like a hipster. I'm not sure what the female equivalent of a hipster is.
The hipster.
With no beard.
Hacker.
Hacker. Yeah. Okay. Right. Last question.
Sorry.
That was good. Well, we want you to get the book.
So I just wanted to ask you what, in your opinion, would be, we have this gig economy, a lot of freelancers, what are they going to mean in the long term for the public sector? how about pensions? How are we sure that even though this guy is a fantastic hacker and works with, you know, all these amazing technologies, that he's saving for his pension, or that he's contributing with a decent health plan and so on? And what do you think is going to happen with?
Yeah. Well, we talked about it with the civil servants of Geneva. Yeah, maybe you want to.
I'll let you.
No, because there's a massive transfer of responsibility, right, from the state to the corporation to the individual. How does that play out? Great question.
That's a huge issue. So Laetitia was nice enough to come into the state of Geneva today, and we gathered 15 senior civil servants who are working on this issue of the future of work from all these different angles. Because what's particularly complex with this specific issue is that it involves all these different ministries. Michael hinted before at the difficulty that you'll have within an organization like a government, like a state, at agreeing upon these complex, wicked, tricky issues with all these different viewpoints. So right now we're not equipped for that in Switzerland. When you look at France, for instance, arguably the greatest provider of entrepreneurs, the greatest funder of entrepreneurs is actually unemployment. The unemployment insurance. That's not the case in Switzerland. You can't get unemployed and decide to use that money to start your business. They want you to be applying for jobs.
But I think what she means is that basically social contributions depended on this system where everybody contributed, and now you have more and more people who either opt out of the system willingly or are pushed out of the system or whenever in it, and who do not contribute the same way. And the thing is, it's often a lot of them optimize. Fiscally, and they optimize their revenues the way an entrepreneur, the way a company would. But ultimately, they're people who will need a pension and who will, get sick and need all these things. And traditionally, it was, companies were not treated the same way as people, and so you had the old. Shopkeepers, etc., who had a different system because their insurance was their shop, for example, or the license they had, or whatever. And so they opted out of the system willingly because they had alternatives. And now you had this whole new group of independent, self-employed people who do not have a license or a shop or something that they can sell when they retire. And my view is that we have to reconsider the difference between the self-employed and the salaried worker, and kind of have a level playing field, because otherwise you'll have more and more of that behavior of opting out, and basically everything that's a form of insurance will basically not work. Will also get more expensive for everyone else, because the people who so for example, the people who have a medical issue will remain in the system because they want to be sure they're covered, whereas everyone else will opt out, and then the insurance companies or the state will be left with the people with high risks, and the people with low risks will leave. So it just doesn't really work.
So we said last question, but it better be a good one, okay? Because we need to finish on a high. Okay, no pressure, but let's see.
Thank you very much for great historical perspective and coming out of it, comforting promise that the future is in creativity, and I believe this is mainstream. But some intellectuals draw concerns, both technological and social. Technological, that as soon as artificial general intellect learn to learn, there would be no catching up for human intellect. And second, Yuval Harari mentioned before, he points out that AI and robotization would make a huge proportion of people irrelevant. So then when huge masses are irrelevant, who would pay for social services or craftsmanship? And the question is, it's very difficult to believe those scenarios can come true, but they may come true way faster than we can expect. should we, as a society, start talking about this because we are not prepared for this at all, especially in social economical aspect, or should we just dismiss it? This is the question.
I'm going to broaden it as well, because the thing, where I think you were heading towards is this idea of the universal basic income, right? Which I'm surprised it didn't come up already. So let's just go around the room on universal basic income. Where you stand? Is it the answer? Is it too simplistic a tool for a really complicated? No pressure, but we want a really profound answer from you. Okay. Okay.
Well, I don't know.
42.
I don't know. You know.
Thank you for your intellectual honesty.
I don't know either. I do have one idea that I'd like to share with you. It's just UBI, why not? Why not? But it doesn't really solve the other problems. So is it UBI with social protection, with access to housing, with medical care and all the rest? Is it UBI with education and all the things that actually matter in our lives? Or is it instead of? So basically, I never know what people talk about when they talk about UBI, and it's really hard to discuss something if we don't really talk about the same thing. So I don't know, what is UBI? Is it the thing of libertarians who want to substitute UBI and leave all the rest out, the things that we fought for hundreds of years, or is it something on top of something else?
So let's imagine, like, because it's Switzerland, UBI is set at what, 30,000 Swiss francs a month or whatever? Would that be more or less inclined to start and bury?
Honestly speaking, I think it's pretty impossible to answer it within the short time frame. I don't think there's so many parameters in the equation that I think it's just impossible to have a finite answer to it. I don't think we can really afford anything that's on top of what's actual. So I think it would be like a partial compensation or not. But I don't have like a profound view on the topic, to be honest.
So we actually had a vote. We actually had a vote a short while ago in Switzerland, 2 or 3 years ago, and it was rejected by a majority of the population. Now, part of the argument is also it was an initiative, so on a constitutional level, just introduce universal basic income, kind of. And so it all depends then on the implementation, and that's what you're all hinting at. Is it depends on how it is implemented.
Okay, right, so we're going to wrap up there, but you want to plug an event, right, before we... Yep.
Yeah, Alexander mentioned that in Geneva we have problems to funding new companies, people who want to create a new company, if you're employed. We also have problems in supporting financially people who are still in the job and who want to do training, because to be able to receive money for training you have to be jobless. And that is a bit absurd. So,
from a tax perspective, you can only get your money back if
exactly. Exactly. That's the whole issue, and that's how the system is at the moment. Yeah. And so, what we're doing on Friday we're doing the 5th Forum Économie Numérique, so the Digital Economy Forum, which is at the Fair Genève, a few meters from here, and it will last the whole morning. And it's for SMEs, so it's really meant for people in SMEs and trying to find solutions for them, while they're still having people in their workforce, how to keep them trained, how to keep them motivated, how to keep them at the right level of training that they need. Look forward, look what your jobs are going to look like in a few years, and make sure that your workforce is at that level so that you can keep the workforce and keep them updated. So that's what we're going to look at Friday morning at the Forum Économie Numérique.
Starting what time?
8 o'clock until midday, and there is a lunch included.
Can we please have a round of applause for Just to say again, that book is available in Payon. And I'm going to give out two copies in a second. And then a round of applause for Arthur. And his beer is available in Coop if you would like to buy it. A round of applause to Alexander. I think you are leading the crowd. and then a round of applause for Dave. What's the name of your drone company? What's the name of the drones?
Flyability.
Flyability. Where can we buy flyability drones? Are they for corporates? Are they expensive, high-end
Yeah,
drones?
like 30,000.
Okay. I wanted to give you a plug. Okay.
And you have to wear a headset.
Oh, okay. Round of applause for Dave as well. Okay, we're going to give
to
one.
Ben and Dan perhaps as well for organising it.
Oh, yes.